Greetings! Welcome to the chapter on influence and how to use influence ethically. This chapter is not in the book at all. Some of the stuff that is talked about in this chapter is scattered through other chapters, but this is a far more effective use of this particular subject matter all in one place. And so influence is just the practice of changing or preserving somebody's attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, or whatever, right? You're either keeping what they have or changing it in some way, shape, or form. And we do that through three methods: through power, through persuasion, and assertiveness. And the majority of this chapter is about those three things. I'm going to discuss each one of them individually in far more depth. And so the first of those is power. And power is simply the potential that one person has for changing the behavior, attitude, or belief, or keeping the behavior, attitude, or belief of somebody the same. The potential, that's the key word, potential to create change or to keep things static. Potential. And that power comes from someplace, right? There are sources of power, and the thing about power is, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about the principles of power, power in and of itself is not positive or negative. It's how that power is used and how that power is received that makes it positive or negative. And some of the sources of power tend to be more positive or negative than others, which leads to potential abuses, as you'll be able to see once we start talking about the different sources or types of power. And the first of these sources or types of power is coercive power. And this is power that is based on the belief that you have that they can hurt you some way. They can hurt you physically, they can hurt you mentally, emotionally, whatever, right? This is threats. This is what bullies do. They coerce you. They scare you into doing what they want to do. Clearly, pretty negative. The second type of power is reward power. And reward power is exactly what it sounds like. You believe that that person has the ability to reward you with something. It might be money. It might be love. It might be sex. It might be food. It could be whatever. You believe that they give you, that if you do what they say, they will give you something in return. This would be an example of this would be your job, right? You believe your boss can reward you with something. So that is, they have reward power over you. A lot of times students think that the student-teacher relationship is based on reward power, but that's not true, because most teachers do not reward students. They basically set up parameters, and if the student hits those parameters, they get a certain grade. That's not a reward. That is you reaching those parameters. A reward would be extra credit or bonus points. That would be an example of a reward. Most teachers don't do that often. The third type, or third source of power, is legitimate power. This is where you believe that they have power over you because they were selected or elected to a certain position, such as politicians, such as chief of police, right? You believe that they have a legitimate claim to that position, so you listen to what they say. Now, it is possible that you don't agree with that. I know plenty of people that don't agree that President Obama has a legitimate claim to the position that he has. And so they don't particularly follow too much of what he says. They don't really listen to what he has to say. So, and we'll talk more about that under principles of power as well. The fourth type of power is expert power. It's exactly what it sounds like. You allow that person to have power over you because they have knowledge or a skill that you don't. That would be an example of this class. In another situation, you might have power over me because you have the knowledge or the skill in that given situation. And the last one is the one that a lot of people have trouble with. It's a little bit more confusing. It's called referent power. And referent power is power that comes from other people's opinions and respect and admiration, right? So somebody only has power because other people respect and admire them. So you believe that you should also respect and admire that person. For example, celebrities or sports stars often have referent power. You know, let's think about Oprah Winfrey, one of the most powerful women in the world. But why? Is she an expert in anything? Maybe TV broadcasting, but that's not why she rose to prominence. Does she bully people? No. Does she reward people? Not really. I mean, she has that show that she would give people stuff, but she was powerful long before that ever happened. So was she selected legitimately or elected? No. So you can see her power comes because people admire and respect her. And so that's why celebrities have power. Now again, you don't have to agree with that power. And if you don't agree with that power, they don't have power over you. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So you have coercive power, which is like a bully. You have reward power. You believe that they can give you something. Legitimate power, somebody is selected or elected to a position legitimately. Expert power, they have a knowledge or the skill. And referent power, they have power based on other people's respect and admiration. So principles of power. The first of these, and this is a big one, power is perception, not fact. If you don't believe that that person has power over you, chances are they don't. Like, if you meet a celebrity and you don't agree that they have any power over you, they're not going to have power over you. You're just going to see them as a regular person. Using the elected official, if you don't believe that they won that election fairly, legitimately, like George W. Bush, then you're not going to give that person power, right? It's in your mind. So if you don't let a bully have power over you, if you don't say, you know what, I don't care if he hurts me because pain is temporary, then he's not going to have power over you. And that's actually one of the best things they tell you to do when it comes to bullies, is stand up to them. They might punch you in the face, but then they're going to leave you alone because they're going to have easier fish to fry. So power is about perception. It's not real. Power is imaginary. It's a social construct. Power exists within a relationship. All relationships have power going on. And this is why in any relationship there's going to be somebody who has power and somebody who doesn't have power. Now here's the thing. That's not always the same. So in one context, you may have the power, but in another context, your significant other may have the power. In one relationship, you may have the power. In another relationship, somebody else may have the power. So power exists. And when people say, oh, everybody in this group is equal, that's crap. Somebody has the power. And if that's why, like, when I do group work, you know, I hate it when people don't kind of choose a leader. Because if there's nobody that's going to take control and to kind of assume a certain level of power, oftentimes nothing gets done. Power is based on resources. The person or entity that has the most resources often also has the most power. You know, let's think about oil for a second. Why do these little tiny countries on the far side of the world have so much power over big giant countries like the United States or China or, you know, Russia? Why do they have so much power? It's because they have something that we all need. And so because of that, the next thing on your slide, you're going to see the person with less to lose has a power. So for Saudi Arabia, that has all the oil, they'll just sell to somebody else. So they have way more power in that particular relationship than we do in that when it comes to oil. Because if we exert our own power and our own influence, we say, no, we're not going to pay that. All they have to do is sell to somebody else, right? In an interpersonal relationship, think about how, like, you have a guy, let's say it's an average guy, and then you have a girl who's way prettier than he thinks that he should be able to get, right? And so because he's average and she's above average, who has more power? The girl does, right? Because if they break up, she can get another of his level or higher. But if they break up, he might not be able to get somebody of that level again. So that's why you see the person that has less to lose makes the rules. So maybe if they're late, it's no big deal. But if you're late, it's a big deal, right? Think about doctor's offices. If you're late, what happens? You don't get seen, you might have to pay a fee. But if the doctor's late, oh well, because they have less to lose, because there's always more patients to be seen. But for you, that person is you might have to wait 6 months to be seen by another doctor. So they have less to lose, so they have more power. And because of that, the person with the most power can make or break the rules, right? It's like, think about your own interpersonal relationships. Think about who has the power in a given situation. If the person who has the power doesn't want to go out, but the person who has the power wants to go out, what do you end up doing? You go out, right? And if you don't want to go out and you don't have the power, then you just have to suck it up. But if you have the power and you don't want to go out, and the other person wants to go out, but they don't have the power, again, if they go out, they're going to get in trouble, right? That's like why when women say, oh, I don't want anything for Christmas, dear. That's not true. They do, guys. They do want something. It's a trap. They're exerting their power over you. And power is not inherently good or bad. Power, like conflict from the previous chapter, it is. It's just inevitable. It's a natural thing, right? It just happens. It's how that power is used. So if you use your power to coerce people, to bully people, then you are using it in a negative way. But if you use your power to share your knowledge, to share your expertise, or to create positive things for your community, then you are using power in a positive way. So power isn't positive or negative. But we tend to think of power in a more negative way, because when we think of power, we often think of bullies and people who are aggressiveness and using that power to get what they want. And that is not just what power is. That's actually the negative way of using power. So that's the first way we influence people, through the use of power. The second way we influence people is the use of persuasion. And to cover persuasion in 20 minutes or whatever is pretty hard to do. People get college degrees in persuasion. So you are just going to get the barest minimum so you get an idea of what persuasion is and how it works. Persuasion is essentially using reasoning, logic, credibility, and emotion to make those changes in people, right? So power is the potential you have to create change in somebody, and that power comes from some source. Persuasion is using credibility, emotion, logic to create that change. Right? And we're going to talk about those three components, because those components are what create persuasion. And the first of them, if you've ever heard the term ethos, pathos, and logos, that's what those three things are. And the first of those that we're going to talk about is logos, or logic and reasoning. And so when you create a persuasive argument, it's comprised of two things. It's comprised of reasons, which are there are statements that answer the question why, and claims, which are just statements of belief. So if I say, hey, you should go see the movie Ant-Man because it's funny, that is a reason. Because it answers the question why, because it's funny. If I just said, hey, you should go see the movie Ant-Man because it's the best movie ever, is that a reason or a claim? It's a claim because it doesn't answer the question why. So reasons answer the question why. Hey, you should go see this movie because it's funny, it's got beautiful people, and it's hilarious. Right? I already said hilarious. Because it's got Paul Rudd in it. Maybe you like Paul Rudd. So where acclaim just says, hey, this is what you should do. Claim versus reason. Now, what makes a good reason? And this is where people's persuasive arguments often fail, is their reasoning, their reasons are poor. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a good reason. The first thing is it's relevant to the claim. It should not be something that goes off topic. It should not be something like a red herring, and a red herring is something thrown in there to draw attention away. It should be, that reason should be focused. So if I want you to go see the movie Ant-Man, going to see the movie Ant-Man because it's free popcorn day, that is not a good reason. Because you could go see any movie. Like if I wanted you to just go see a movie, any movie, then free popcorn would be a good reason. But if I want you specifically to see Ant-Man, free popcorn is not a good movie because it has nothing to do with the actual topic at hand. So your reasons have to support the claims. They have to be directly linked to the claim. They have to be well supported, meaning you have to use evidence. You have to use evidence to support what you're saying. So if I want you to see Ant-Man because it's funny, because it has great action sequences, and because it has hot people in it, I need to provide proof. So I would, if I was going to talk about a good reason for it being funny, I would offer, hey, you should go see Ant-Man because it's really funny. There's this part when the Mexican guy, Michael Pena, is lip syncing to what other people are saying, but it's his voice, but it's their mouths moving, and it's hilarious. That would be a good reason because it's specifically supporting my claim that it is funny. Same with the action sequence. You should go see it because it's got these great action sequences. I would have to provide evidence of a good action sequence because that makes it. If I just say, oh, there's good action sequences, it's not a good reason. It's just a claim. But if I say it's got good action sequences, and here's an example of one of those action sequences, it's showing you why it's got good action sequences, and those are good reasons. And good reasons are meaningful to the person. So if you know the person has a thing for Paul Rudd, then you would say, hey, Paul Rudd's in it, and I know you like Paul Rudd. Or Evangeline Lilly is the lady's name. Oh, I know you think she's hot. She's in that movie, right? Those are what make good reasons. They're relevant to the claim. They are well supported with evidence, and they are meaningful to that person. And if I know the person likes car chases, then I'm going to talk about car chases. If I know the person likes Michael Douglas, then I'm going to talk about Michael Douglas, right? You got to focus on that. And this is where people's persuasive arguments often fall apart, is they kind of create these generic reasons that aren't specific to what they're saying. And they might work on some people, but they might not work on other people. So that's the first thing. Logic. Logos, which is reasoning and evidence. The second aspect of persuasion, and in my opinion, it's the more important part, is credibility. And credibility is the extent to which your audience believes your credibility, your competence, your trustworthiness, and your likability. So the audience is viewing you as competent or incompetent, as trustworthy or untrustworthy, and likable or not likable, right? And competence is your expertise. Do they believe that you have the skill or the knowledge to support what you're saying? If the answer is no, your credibility is going to be lower. But if they believe you and they think that you're knowledgeable, they think that you're skilled, your credibility is going to be higher. The second part of that is trustworthiness. Are you dependable? Are you honest? Do you say what you're going to do? If you're somebody who's not dependable, then people are going to look at your credibility as low. For example, in some of my traditional classrooms, I have people who miss a lot of class, they don't do a lot of work, and then when it comes time to do the group project, which you guys online don't have to do because of the level of difficulty that it would be. I'm not going to get into it. They have no credibility. So I don't want to put them into a group because I can't trust them. And I don't like it when other people impact other people's grades. So their credibility is lower. So they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be here, I promise. I don't trust them. So they lack credibility. So they're not going to persuade me that they're going to be here. The only way they're going to do that is by being here every day, on time, ready to go. The third part of credibility is likability. You know, are you friendly? Do you smile? Are you standoffish? Are you congenial? Are you open? Are you closed off? That one's a little bit more. A lot of that has to do with intangible stuff. You can't really. Some people are just inherently likable, and others are not. But you can smile. You can be open. You can be friendly. So you can have some impact over it. So those three aspects of credibility establish your credibility positively or negatively. And how do you increase it as a whole, as a general rule? How do you increase your credibility? Well, number one, tell the truth, right? Be honest. If you are talking about a particular subject, don't hide things. One of the best ways to persuade people that your side is the better side is by actually talking about the other side and showing where it's weak, right? So tell the truth. Don't attack other people. This is why we're getting into election season, and I hate it. I want to pull out all my hair and rip my eyeballs out of my head, because all politicians do is attack other politicians, right? They don't attack their policies. I mean, they do in an offhand kind of way, but more often than not, they just attack them. Oh, this candidate kicks dogs. That was literally one from the last election cycle. You know, oh, this candidate locked his dog on the roof of his car. Oh, this candidate kicked puppies. What? All that does is decreases your credibility because it makes you look like an idiot. Show that you're knowledgeable and you're an expert, right? And when you're talking, you tell people, hey, remember credibility strategies from previous chapter? We do things, impression management, to show people that we're credible. We talk about our experience, we talk about our research. Show that you care about other people. That's a big thing. A lot of times people are afraid to be persuaded by messages because they feel like they're going to lose themselves. They feel like they're going to basically just be squashed into nothingness. Because sometimes people become overly aggressive in their attempts to persuade people. So show that you care about them. Say, hey, I understand where you're at. How can we, I'm going to give you my idea. Let's see where we can, so let's see if we can come to common ground, right? So you don't just go in and bully people and just bulldoze their ideas. You know, telling somebody, oh, that idea is stupid, is the opposite of this. Even if you think the idea is stupid, the last thing in the world you should do is say, oh, that's a stupid idea. You say, hey, I don't agree with that idea. Here's my idea. Let's see if we can come to something, right? So that's how you build your credibility. So that's the second part of persuasion. First you have logic and logos. Then you have ethos, the audience's perception of you as a speaker, as a person, which is credibility. And then you have pathos, which is an emotion. Persuasion hinges on emotion. And what I mean by that is you cannot have a truly persuasive message without emotion. You can have somewhat of a persuasive message, but it's the emotion that really kicks it up a notch. And if for any of you out there who remember the 2000 election cycle when Gore ran against Bush the first time, Gore was a robot. He was wooden. He had no personality. He was not emotional. So people couldn't feel like they could relate to him. And there were people, even Democrats, who said, you know what, if I had to pick one of them to have a beer with, I would have a beer with W. You know, even if I disagree with his policy, he seems more emotional. It seems like he's more of a human being. And so emotion is important. However, you cannot substitute logic and reasoning and credibility with emotion, right? The emotion has to be appropriate. If you get a speeding ticket, you should not be crying to get out of that speeding ticket. because that is the inappropriate use of emotions. Now, that's not to say that you can't be upset and be crying because you're going to get a ticket, but you shouldn't fake cry to get out of a ticket. Because let me tell you, they probably know when you're faking it. And the thing about emotion is it often depends on the mood and the attitude of the person that you are trying to persuade. If they're in a good mood, emotion might be a little bit more effective than if they're in a bad mood. The emotion used, like I said, must be appropriate. It must be appropriate to you. It must be appropriate to the circumstance. It must be appropriate to the speaker. So, for example, for me, if you approach me with, you're trying to persuade me, let's say, to create a better grade, coming at me emotional is not going to help because it's not appropriate to the situation. It's not appropriate to me. I'm going to be much more persuaded by using logic and credibility than emotion. And I personally am not going to rely on emotion because it's not my thing, right? It's important and I have the emotion, but that's not the primary thing that I'm using. But the big thing when it comes to emotion is you should not substitute logic and reasoning and credibility with emotion. That's a lot of the mistake that people make with persuasion, is they want to use emotion to pull at your heartstrings, but they don't address credibility or logic, and so it falls short. So that's the second way in which we create influence, is through the use of persuasion. Now, persuasion is tricky. This is why people get college degrees in it, and they spend months and months and months and months and months learning about persuasion, the art of persuasion. And so to go through the process of persuasion every time you want to use it can become tricky. So we have created these persuasive shortcuts that we kind of use to persuade people on a daily basis. And they're called compliance gaining strategies. Strategies for gaining compliance, i.e. getting somebody else to do what you want them to do. And I want you to think of each one of these as a recipe. And the ingredients that you have to work with are evidence and reasoning, credibility, and emotion. Those are your three ingredients. And by mixing those three ingredients into different amounts, you come up with different end results. And that's what these compliance gaining strategies are, as they are persuasive shortcuts where you take bits of each of those three, put them together in different amounts to create an end result. They're shortcuts. The first of these is supporting evidence. Obviously, this is going to rely heavily on logic, followed by credibility with a dash of emotion. This is my primary compliance gaining strategy, both as a sender and receiver. I like to rely on the evidence and the logic and the credibility way more than the emotion in most areas. So if you want to change my opinion on something, you're best suited to providing clear evidence. So that's the first one. The second one is exchange. This is a trade. Hey, if you do the dishes for me, I'll walk the dog for you. Flat up exchange. This relies heavily on credibility because if I cannot trust you to hold up your end of the bargain, I am not going to be comfortable in a trade with you. So this would be mostly credibility followed by some emotion with just a touch of logic and evidence, because you don't really need logic and evidence on this one. The third one, and this is the one that always cracks me up, because to me it's the simplest one, and yet it's the one that we always come up with these ridiculous plans to try to get people to do things, when all we really would have to do is ask, right? When I was in high school, I have trouble talking to ladies, and I couldn't ask them out. I've never asked a woman out on a date, ever, in 43 years. I have, when I did theater, I'd be like, hey, let's all hang out as a group, right? Because I was a chicken. And in high school, I wanted to go to prom, right? But I was afraid to ask anybody out. I was a chicken. So I created this elaborate, ridiculous Rube Goldbergian machine to ask this girl out. Well, of course, it collapsed horribly, right? Ends up, she didn't go to prom. And I'd had a crush on this girl for like 4 years. She didn't go to prom. And then after prom, I told her I wanted to ask her, and she said, all you would have had to do is ask. And direct request is often the easiest way to do it. Is just ask. And say, hey, I want you to do this. Boom. So when at the beginning of the semester, if you're in my classroom and I ask you, hey, don't use your cell phone. That is a direct request, right? It's kind of equal measures of all three ingredients. None of them are more than any other. The fourth one is an empathy-based request. This is where you are trying to get them to feel some emotion. Whether it's nostalgia, love, affection, anger. You're trying to get them to feel something. So clearly emotion takes center stage, right? Followed closely by a considerable amount of credibility, because if they don't believe you to be honest, they're going to believe that the emotion is fake. So, and then a decent amount of logic, because you got to show, hey, this is why you should be feeling this emotion, right? The next one is face maintenance. This is where we're going to talk about face more in the next chapter. But the messages are indirect. You don't want to embarrass anybody. You don't want to make people feel like they don't have control. So you phrase things in a way that's indirect. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? This is another one that it's kind of equal parts. The differences in the ingredients is fairly minimal. Then you have other benefit. And other benefit is like, hey, if you allow me to do this, just think, you won't have to cook me dinner for a week because I'll be out of town. Or you won't have to take me anywhere, right? People are like, well, isn't that the same thing as exchange? No, because an exchange is you focus on what both of you get. Where another benefit is you don't focus on what you get, you focus specifically on the benefits for the other person. And this is another one that has, kind of equal measures, logic and credibility, and then a good amount of emotion. And then the last one is, it's an emotional-based strategy, but it's a negative emotional-based strategy. You were trying to guilt them. You were trying to threaten them. If you don't do what I'm going to say, I'm going to tell mom, right? If you don't give me that money, I'm going to tell mom that you took stuff out of her purse. So distributive is also emotional, and so it relies heavily on emotion, but it's negative use of emotion. So these are the shortcuts that we use, right? There's 7 of them that we use to get people to do what we want. So how do we pick the right one? How do we know which is the most effective one in a given situation? Well, pick the one that's best tailored to them. So for example, if you come at me and you want me to change your grade, you know that emotion is not the way to go with me. So you know that I need one that is based heavily on logic and evidence. And so based on what I already said, you know that the first one is the one, supporting evidence is the one that's going to work best for me. But if I was more of an emotional person, you would know that one of the emotional ones is better. So for let's say you want to convince your parents to let you go somewhere cool for spring break, and you know your mom went there, you're gonna play on that emotion, right? Because that's what's gonna work best for her. Sometimes you have to pick one that's gonna protect a relationship, because if you're too aggressive, or you use one of the more negative ones, or ones that's a little too heavy in something that doesn't work for them, it could damage the relationship and create conflict. And you also need to think about which is best for you. For example, when I try to persuade people, I don't use an emotional argument. That's not comfortable for me. So when I'm making that argument, it's not going to feel natural. And so my persuasive appeal is going to be less effective than if I use something that is more effective for me, which is going to be an evidence-based. But again, you have to balance those three things. What works best for you, what works best for them, and what's going to best protect the relationship. And so what do you do if they're resistant? Because often when we're trying to persuade somebody to do something, we're trying to persuade them to do something that is core to who they are. It's a belief. It's a value. And so how do you overcome that resistance? And this is where a lot of people are better at persuading than other people. It's not that they're geniuses or anything, it's that they are better adept at overcoming that inherent resistance people have to change. And the first thing you should do is don't keep using the same strategy, right? If you are using an emotional appeal, an emotional-based strategy, and it's not working, you shouldn't keep hammering that dead horse into the ground, because that's just going to turn them off and it's going to make them go the other direction. So don't keep, hitting the same one over and over again. Try a different strategy. Ask them, hey, I do this all the time. Hey, why don't you want to do that? You'd be surprised how often that works, because people are not expecting somebody to ask them why that they're unwilling to change. And the fact that you're actually asking them, hey, why are you hesitant to make this change? A lot of people find that very appealing. And so through the communication process, you can find out what you need to do to create that change. Try a less forceful strategy. A lot of times when we're excited about something and we really want something to happen, we tend to go gusto, full gusto, and we're aggressive. Even if we don't realize it, we can be aggressive. And I know myself, because I'm a passionate person and I'm very all the time, some people feel like I'm pressuring them. And I don't want to make people feel like I'm pressured, so a lot of times I have to take a step back and find a less forceful method, especially after that initial negative reaction. Okay, I reevaluate and say, okay, they didn't react positively to that. What can I do to make that change? So those are ways that you can overcome hesitance to the compliance gating strategies. So we talked about power, which is the potential for change, and the 5 sources of power. Then we talked about persuasion, which is using credibility, logic, and evidence, and emotion to create change. And the last method in which we influence people is assertiveness. And assertiveness is a lot like conflict. Assertiveness has a negative connotation to most people. When they hear the word assertiveness, what they hear in their minds is aggressive. Assertive does not equal aggressiveness. They are on the same scale, which we will talk about here in a minute, but assertiveness is not aggressive. Assertiveness is simply standing up and sending messages that stand up for yourself without stepping on anybody else. So you're defending your personal rights without stepping on anybody else's personal rights. And it's a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, you have people who are passive. These people are, they don't communicate, they tend to be avoiders or accommodators when it comes to conflict management. They don't state their opinions, they don't stand up for themselves, they're doormats, right? Everybody walks all over them. They never stand up for themselves. And so they are certainly not creating any influence anyway. They're not changing anything in anybody because they're never standing up. That's on one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the polar opposite. You have aggressiveness. And this is where you lash out, right? If you think back to the conflict management, these are people who are competitors. These are aggressive. They don't care about you. It's just about winning. People who are aggressive tend to use coercive power to get what they want. there's almost no regard for the other person. It's about them, their needs, their rights, their beliefs. You see this a lot with the pro-gun people. Like, I'm a gun guy, I own guns, but I'm not a gun nut. I actually don't like to be associated with those crazy people because they are so overly aggressive about their rights to own guns that they make everybody else look crazy with them. And they're just overly aggressive about their beliefs to what they can and can't do. You know, that's why they get into flame wars. Go online, go on Facebook, go on any discussion board. You're going to see people who just call each other names. Those are people who are overly aggressive. Again, those are not going to influence anybody either because you're being overly aggressive. And so you're just abusing your power. If you do make change, it's unethical, right? You're only doing it because you're forcing somebody to do something. Now, right in the middle is not assertiveness. You would think that if at the 0 mark you have passiveness and at the 100 mark you have aggressiveness, you'd think that assertiveness would be right in the middle. No. Right in the middle is passive-aggressive. Now, passive-aggressive is the one that I think is the worst of them all because it's unpredictable. It's like if somebody's going to be passive, I can expect. I know what to expect. If somebody's going to be aggressive, I know what to expect. But if somebody's going to be passive-aggressive, you never know what they're going to do. Passive-aggressiveness is essentially being aggressive by being passive. See, what? Let's say you and your roommate get into a fight. And you're like, okay, I'm going to leave. And you tell your roommate, I'm expecting a very important call. My cell phone is busted. When they call, please take a message. And they say, whatever. And the phone rings and they don't answer. Or they answer but they don't take a message. What are they saying to you? They're basically flipping you off. They're saying, F off, you dirty hippie. But they're doing it by simply doing nothing. That is passive aggressiveness. Being stubborn, being unresponsive, refusing to help. These are passive aggressive behaviors. And like I said, in my opinion, that's worse than passiveness or aggressiveness. So that would be at like the 50 mark. At the 75 mark, between passive aggressiveness and aggressiveness, you have assertiveness. And assertiveness is the goal. This is, like I said, this is where you stand up, you engage in collaborative efforts to keep everybody happy. You know, you're focusing on the needs and interests of both people. You are truthfully exerting your beliefs, but you're not damaging other people's beliefs at the same time. And that's a problem I have also a lot with politics and religion both, is they're like, I'm right, you're wrong. You know, Christianity, despite being a religion that's supposed to be about forgiveness and acceptance, you know, maybe it is on paper, but you don't see that behavior in a lot of the people who practice Christianity. They're judgmental. That's the problem I have, is they're being assertive and overly aggressive, not assertive, they're being aggressive in their beliefs, which is fine, you can believe what you want to believe, but they shouldn't push that on other people. You know, that's aggressiveness. Being assertive is like saying, hey, this is what I believe, you're totally allowed to believe what you want to believe. That's assertiveness, and that is the goal. So, how do we become better at being assertive? Now, many of you probably have issues with assertiveness. You either come off on the passive end or you come off on the aggressive end. Well, we're going to go through some skills that you can practice to be better at assertive messages. Number one, make I statements. Right? I feel, I believe. We've already talked about I statements in the past, right? You shouldn't use you statements because you statements feel aggressive to people. Even if you don't intend them to be aggressive, they feel aggressive. When you start saying you, people feel attacked. So they're going to react negatively. But if you say I, remember we talked about behavior, consequences, feelings. We talked about that in the previous chapter. Behavior, consequences, feelings. They can't argue with that. You're saying, when this behavior happens, I feel this way, and this is the consequence, right? Or when this behavior happens and this is the consequence, I feel this way. So when you go to the casino and lose all our money gambling, we can't pay our rent, I feel like you don't care about this relationship. That is standing up, but you're not saying, oh, I hate it when you go spend all our money at the casino. That's very aggressive. Same basic idea, but it's a far less aggressive way of doing it. People don't like to be attacked. We talked about that in the conflict chapter. Make eye contact. Have good posture. I mean, that's huge. It's hard to be assertive when you're doing this. Think about that movie Office Space. When the guy stands like this, he doesn't make eye contact with anybody. People just ignore him. And if you want to be assertive, you got to stand up straight, look him in the eye, and be confident. Not only in what you say, but how you say it and your posture. And that's the next things on. You'll see that on the PowerPoint. Have a good, confident tone of voice. Speak fluently, meaning know what you need to say. You shouldn't be going ah every 2 seconds. Because when you say ah, you're telling them that you really don't know what you're saying. So those are kind of passive behaviors. Now, I'm not talking about the every now and again you say or ah or like. I'm talking about the constant use of Again, think about that movie Office Space, where the guy wants his stapler and he says and he doesn't make any eye contact. And you want to be sensitive to the face needs of other people. And again, we're going to talk more about face in the next chapter, but positive face is we want to feel like we have value. Negative face is we want to feel like we have control of our lives. So you shouldn't put people into positions that make them feel like they have no control. Like you shouldn't tell people, this is what you have to do. You know, this is just one option. This is one change. This is one out of many possibilities. You know, if I were you, I might try this. You're framing it in a way that makes them feel like they're ultimately in charge, and you don't want to make people feel like they don't have any value. So when you're framing your messages that way, keep these things in mind: I statements, behavior, consequences, feelings. Stand up straight, make eye contact, use a good tone of voice, watch your aggressiveness. I have trouble with this because I'm a passionate person. People often think I'm being aggressive, and I'm not. I'm just being passionate. The thing about assertiveness is it's culturally driven. What is considered assertive in our culture, in a collectivistic culture, would be considered aggressive. What is considered assertive in our culture, in other cultures, high masculine cultures, for example, would be considered passive. So, for example, walking up to somebody you find attractive at a bar and just talking to them would be considered assertive in our behavior, depending on what we said in our culture. But in a collectivistic culture or a low ambiguity tolerant society would be considered aggressive. Oh, you don't go up and talk to somebody, that's aggressive. But in like an Italian society, that would be considered passive, right? And if you've ever watched an episode of Jersey Shore and you see the way the men talk to the women, like I'm like, oh my God, I would never speak to somebody like that because it's just way too aggressive. But to them, that's normal. That is normal assertive behavior. And so this concept of assertiveness is definitely very culturally driven. So the rules I laid out were specifically for this culture. And so that is influence, right? You have power, which is the potential to create change. You have persuasion, which is using credibility, logic and reasoning, and emotion to create change. And then you have assertiveness, which is standing up for your rights and beliefs without stepping on anybody else's rights and beliefs. Those are the three ways in which we create influence, or that which we influence other people to either create change or maintain a certain way. If you have any questions, please contact me. Have a nice day. Stay out of trouble, don't do drugs.